Okay, so once your underpainting is totally dry to the touch, I recommend doing it a day ahead if you can. We will move on to the top layers of our sphere. So there's a couple ways you can work. I tend to like to mix on the canvas, but you can also pre-mix your colors. So I'm going to pre-mix a little bit, and then others I will show you just kind of how you can mix right on the canvas. The other thing is, so here, this is an old bottle of liquid. Your liquid's going to look a little bit different. You may find that your oil paints are fine just to use right onto the canvas. You don't need to add anything to them. Sometimes they come out of the tube a little bit thick depending on the brand, and so that's when liquid comes into play. And again, liquid also helps to make the white paint dry faster. So for today, I'm going to use a little liquid, especially for the white area, and I'm just going to put a tiny bit up here on my canvas. Not my canvas, my palette. And then I'm going to get a little bit more ultramarine out here. I have white. And I'm actually going to use a little burnt umber to mix with my blue to get black this time. A little more white. Okay. And again, with oil paints, you're gonna find that a little goes a long way, and you can always add more paint to your palette. It's always okay to add more paint to your palette, but if you put tons of paint on your palette, you can't get it back into the tube. And so to preserve your materials, I recommend like starting with just a little bit, especially with a tiny painting like this. If you're doing a big piece, use a little more. So for pre-mixing, we can use, I'll show you this one first. So you just want to just grab, and you're thinking of the different values as you go, and then you can add a little more white, get lighter, 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 a little more. Sometimes it's nice to see on the palette that progression of the different values as they go from light to dark. So there's 3 values right there. Clean this off, switch to my other. And then I'll show you with this ultramarine and a little bit of burnt umber. It gives a really nice, rich black. As you can see that there. Okay. And if I need to mix more, I can. Clean that off. Okay. So I'm going to use the same method too, where I'm using different brushes so I don't have to clean my brush every single time. If you only have one brush, you can clean in between colors, but I recommend kind of using different brushes as you go. It'll just help your work go a lot faster. So I'm going to, again, start with this pure white on my highlight. Okay, so we're adding that there. And then I'm going to start grabbing this very pale blue value and applying around. Keeping my strokes in a circular motion for this because it's a sphere. You don't have to do that, but I recommend it. And I'm going to pick up some of this a little bit darker blue. Okay, and so you're starting to see that stripe that's happening right here. I'm going to show you. So we're going to leave that for now. Blend a little. So you just keep going darker and darker as you go. Picking up a little more. Now there's a, that was a big shift. So I'm actually going to mix a little more white. And you can move back and forth. Okay, so this This brush now has become pale blue, which is fine. So what you can do now is, this is where the makeup brush comes in, super soft, and you can blend your colors. You can see that. It really blends beautifully with a very soft, feathery touch. You can clean some of that paint off in between. So with that clean makeup brush, you can really get some lovely blending happening. So you don't have stripes. You want it to seem like a continuous surface without bars of color, even though you are dealing with value shifts. You can see that. Okay. Now I'm going to dip this in a little bit of the paint thinner in between and clean it on my paper towel just to keep it super clean as we're working. Okay, so I'm going to shift to my other brush here and go with some blue. Okay, so that's really dark. And that's why this sphere exercise for you guys is going to be really great, because you're going to get a feel for how the paint moves on the surface, how it responds to pressure with your brushes. You're going to find which brushes you like using and which you don't really like using before you move to your actual portrait piece. So this little sphere exercise is actually super important in this process. And I'm going a little bit fast, but as you can see, you can get your values on there and then come in with your makeup brush again and blend. Now, as you can also see, this paint that I'm using, the ultramarine I'm using is Daniel Smith, which is a great brand. It's a little pricey, but the cool thing about Daniel Smith paints is you can pretty much use them right out of the tube, and the consistency goes on so beautifully, and you don't have to really add anything to them. Other paints that are perhaps a little less expensive, you might have to use a little bit of liquid as you go. Okay, so I've got that little bar there. I'm going to come back to my makeup brush that's clean and smooth that out. So another thing you guys want to think about as you're working are your edges. So where this sphere meets this edge here, we're going to keep this paint wet. So as you move into your portrait pieces, you're going to want to work wet into wet where your figure meets your background, so you can soften those edges as they recede into the background. You might want a crisp hard edge in certain areas, but especially with skin tones and things like that, it actually reads much better if you have soft edges. And as you can see, I like keeping a paper towel handy, just to get, if you get too much paint on your brush or whatever you're doing, it really works well to have something to get some of that paint off. So now I'm going to get this pretty intense black here and add my core shadow. And again, this black was mixed with ultramarine and burnt umber. So just a little trick moving forward. Okay, clean that off. Get some of this blue. Okay. And don't forget your reflective light. So you want that bounce shadow or reflection in the bottom. The other thing to think about is when you start to do your shadow, we're often tempted to do those cartoon type shadows that look like a black pancake. But when you start to really study how light functions in the world and start to look at shadows, they have a lot of color variance in themselves. And so you don't want hard edges on your shadows. You want those to be soft edges. Okay. And then as you get into smaller areas, I really recommend having a little tiny brush that you can use for oil when it comes to those edges that you want really crisp. And this is a very soft brush. I use this particular brush just for oils, but it could potentially be a brush that is used for ink, that is used for watercolor, different things like that. Also, the beauty of working small like this is you can turn your surface as you go. Once you start to work larger and your work is on an easel, you can't turn the canvas as you go, so you learn to contort yourself to meet what you're working on. So I'm going to turn this way just for a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. So I'm going to get a little more paint on this bottom area here, and then I'm going to go back to my makeup brush just to smooth out some of these transitions between tones. Okay. Okay, so it's coming along. So then, clean makeup brush, just smooth out some of those transitions. Now, right there, it's starting to pick, if you find it starting to pick the paint up a little, you can always go back and apply more paint. But I'm just using it to smooth. Smooth down here. Okay. So now, I'm seeing another edge there that I'm going to have to smooth out. So you want to go in and see how you could just go back right into that paint. It stays wet, blend it, and the goal is to avoid stripes. You don't want this to look like a striped ball. You just want it to look dimensional with the different values blending one into another. Okay. Okay, so there we are with our sphere. I'm going to transition now into my shadow. I'm going to use this brush. And I'm actually going to start with blue, not black. And it's going to be just to get some paint on there. And then I'm going to grab some of that black we mixed. Turn this way so you guys can see. Now, one edge that can be extremely crisp is where the ball meets the shadow down here. That's a good place to keep your edge very crisp. But then as the shadow, you don't want, this is what I was talking about with the flat pancake shadow where it has that hard edge. You want to kind of pull that edge out and soften that shadow. And it'll read much more naturally. Okay. And pull that color out. Okay. So for now, I'm not going to actually totally finish my shadow, especially around the edges, because now I need to transition to this background color. Okay. Get this larger brush here. Kind of smooth that out. Some nice long strokes. Okay. Okay. And this edge is going to get even more blended, and same with these edges out here. So while all your paint is still wet, you want to now move to your background color. So I'm going to grab my palette knife again. And then this brush I'm not going to be using anytime soon, so I am going to dip it in a little bit of that thinner and just clean the paint off so it's not sitting with a bunch of paint on it. Even though with oils, you don't have to clean your brushes right away, but again, make sure you clean your brushes super well when you're done. Okay, so I want this pale gray color for my background, so I know I'm going to need a little more white for that. So I'm going to mix this color on my palette. So grabbing some white, and again, because I'm using a greater quantity of white, I'm going to mix in a little bit of that liquid this time, just to give it a little more flexibility. It'll make the paint easier to paint, a little bit thinner, so it'll glide on, and it'll make it dry faster. So same what I did before. I'm going to grab a little bit of blue, I don't want just a plain black and white gray. I might grab this black that I mixed, add that. Still a little blue, so we're gonna add some of the actual, I need more of the actual black. Just a tiny bit. Okay, that's looking like a good color. Okay, so you want to try to get it, if you're going for a flat color, you want to try to mix it as much as possible. And then I'm actually going to grab some of the paint right off this palette knife so I'm not losing any. Okay, so we've got our background color now. I'm just going to apply that. And just like we did with the gesso, you can come over the edges of the tape a little bit, which is great. You don't have to be neat and tidy on the edges then. You can save the neat and tidy for the middle of the painting. I'm getting this color on here. And I'm using a little bit of a larger brush and a flat because it's just so much easier than trying to cover a larger area with a small brush. It can be done, it just takes longer. And as you can see, this paint's going on really smoothly, easily. If you see any little bits of hardened paint, get those off right away. Or if you lose a hair from your brush and it gets in your paint, take it off right away so it doesn't dry in there. Okay, so I'm doing the main part of this background. I'm going to slow down when I come to the edge of my sphere because I don't want to go right through it. And in this case, so mixing enough color so I didn't have to go back and try to match it is best. And you'll get better at that as you go, determining how much to mix. I've had those instances where I'm working on a piece and it's frustrating because you've almost got the whole area covered and you run out of paint. You have to try to mix it again and try to get it exactly the same. It can be done. It's just a little easier if you mix enough to begin with. Okay. So as we come, at first, I am going to do a crisp edge along this sphere. Just to get the paint right up flush, the two colors. And then we're gonna blend that edge with the makeup brush actually. I'm gonna turn this a little. Okay, so this color is pretty much on my background now. And then we can come in with our makeup brush. So again, I'm not going to clean this because in case I want to reapply paint, I'm going to leave the paint on here for now. And then with that makeup brush, you can come in, I'll turn this so you guys can see. You can come in and very carefully smooth that edge and blending it with the background color so it'll recede in space. You get that nice soft edge going. And again, we're going to leave that edge crisp, but we're going to soften this edge back here. And again, as you can see, like all the paint has stayed dry. If we had been working in acrylics, there's a chance that some of this would even already starting to be too dry to go back and blend. But the oils stay wet enough to rework and reblend. And they function a little differently. So if you want them to dry faster, sometimes liquid can help, but a blow dryer doesn't help so much with oil paints. So you do have to think of timing as you're working. I'm gonna smooth this edge out a little more. Okay. So as you can see, it gives that nice soft edge. And because it's wet into wet, and both the sphere paint and the background paint were wet at the same time, blending that edge is extremely easy. There are methods where you can soften edges against a dry background, which I have to do all the time with my paintings. But for our purposes, this is the easiest way. And I got a tiny smear there, so that's why I left this paint on this brush. So I can just come in. I pulled some of that blue too far into the background. Now with the shadow, instead of using the makeup brush, I'm actually going to use the same paintbrush I applied the paint with. And I'm going to actually blend first, start blending a little with this. And as you can see, so you don't have to use the makeup brush, you can also blend with the same paintbrush you used to apply the color. And it goes on pretty well. It does a really beautiful job. Now, if you get some smear, again, just work it back in. Maybe add a little dark again. And I'm actually going to switch to a little bit of a softer brush here. Use this one. I'm going to get some of this paint on here. So again, you can just, so you can get those blending effects both with the makeup brush or just with a soft oil brush. So as you can see, it's blending pretty well. And this brush is a little bit big to be doing this with, but it's soft, so okay. to our makeup brush. Get that nice soft shadow happening. Okay. Okay, so there you have it. You can go back with, if there's any edges you're not happy with, you can go back maybe with your tiny brush and fine tune. I'd like to add a little more of this background color. And that's why it's good to have one of those really, really small detail brushes for areas where you see small details that need adjustments. It really saves on the frustration factor when you're trying to adjust and work on certain areas. Okay. Use this one. This one's pretty small too. So I'm just gonna go back and blend a little bit more here and there where I see areas that need a tiny bit of smoothing out. And you can work and rework oil. That is the beauty of it. Okay, getting that. Okay. So I could probably rework this a lot, but for the sake of time, I'm going to leave this about where it's at right now and demonstrate just a little bit of brush cleaning technique. Okay. Okay, so we'll leave this for where it is right now. So when you're done with your painting session for the day, a first step is just with a paper towel, get as much of the paint off the paper towel or get as much paint off the brush with a paper towel. And that'll also make your solvent go faster, okay? And then dip in a little solvent and you can clean off, and this is for a larger brush like this, and just dip and clean on that same paper towel until you have most of the paint off. But this isn't the final step. So after this, what I like to do is grab some Dawn dish soap and just squirt a little out in the bottom of my sink and work that brush into that Dawn dish soap, which is designed to cut oil, which is cool, and it's eco-friendly. And so just getting all the residue out. Sometimes oil paint has a tendency to hide in the bottom of your brush, and that's what'll cause it to dry in that kind of fanned out way. So you really want to work that Dawn dish soap in and get as much of that paint out. You can also use your Master's brush cleaning soap. And then just simply, when it's all clean, kind of reshape your brush and then just let it air dry. Now for your tiny brushes like this, you can actually use baby oil. So same process. First get as much paint as you can with the paper towel off. You can dip it in a little bit of your solvent, so that's going to take more off. And then with a little teeny brush like this, baby oil is pretty much all you need. So I keep my baby oil in a separate jar so I can refill it, because when it gets paint residue in it, then I can throw it away and refill. So I just put a little baby oil on there and gently dab off the paint. And it's interesting, it looked like it was totally clean, but as I'm applying this baby oil to this brush, there's a little paint coming out in this lid that I can see. And then simply wipe off the residue, reshape, and that will keep your tiny brushes well formed, and that baby oil will protect them. Now, this method is best for brushes that are not going to be used for watercolor though, because if you have baby oil on your brush and you go start painting with watercolor, you might have some issues. So this method with the baby oil is best for oil painting brushes. I can show you with this one again. This one was really dirty, so we're going to take off as much of that oil paint as we can on the paper towel. Use our solvent. It's going to loosen up even more. And with your brushes, you just want to keep going until you don't see paint coming out of them anymore. And then we would move to the Dawn dish soap and then the Masters brush cleaning soap. So hope you enjoy that oil painting demonstration.